This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Mary Frances Phillips, who is a proud native of Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Phillips is an associate professor in the Department of African American Studies at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research areas include the modern Black freedom struggle, Black women's studies, and Black feminism. She was selected as a 2021-2022 award recipient for a faculty fellowship with the Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Notre Dame and the American Association of University Women Postdoctoral Research Lead Fellowship in 2018 and 2019. Her book, Black Panther Woman, The Political and Spiritual Life of Erica Huggins, is the first and only biography on Erica Huggins and documents the previously untold story of her early life and career in the Black Panther Party. It is out now. The heart of her book excavates Huggins' day-to-day experience and acts of political dissent during confinement. She has published journal articles in Souls, a critical journal of Black politics, culture, and society, the Women's Studies Quarterly, the Western Journal of Black Studies, Spectrum, a journal on Black men, and the Syllabus Journal. Outside of the Academy, her essays have been featured in the Huffington Post, Miss Magazine's blog, New Black Man in Exile, Color Lines, Vibe Magazine, Black Youth Project, and the African American Intellectual Society's blog, Black Perspectives. Her work has garnered media attention in Time Magazine, the New York Historical Museum and Library, Women at the Center blog series, the Detroit Free Press, Bronx Net Cable Television, Bronx News 12, WBAI Pacifica Radio, New York City, and WNPR, Connecticut Public Radio. She earned a PhD in African American and African Studies from Michigan State University, an MA in African American and African Studies from The Ohio State University, and her BS in Health Studies from Michigan State. Hi.
Hi.
So great to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
It's so great to be able to catch up with you.
Yes.
So we can dive into it. I know there is a lot that we can talk about, and we definitely have to get into your book. So how did you get into Black studies as a field, and what keeps you committed?
Oh, man. So I have a very interesting academic journey. So first, let me say, I grew up in a very Black household. We had Black art in the home, Black figurines, Ebony magazine, Essence magazine, Jet magazine. So I am coming up in a very unapologetic Black space.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is very much influencing me. And so when I started my undergraduate degree at Michigan State, initially I was a health studies, I graduated as a health studies major. But while I was doing that, I picked up at the time, they had a specialization, which was a Black American and diasporic specialization, where it was offered a host of courses in Black culture, Black history, language, all kinds of topics and disciplines. And so while I'm taking my health studies courses for my major, I'm also coupling that with the courses in the specialization. And in the process, I became just so encompassed with with Black history and culture, and I found myself kind of leaning more towards African American studies, wanting to pursue that. So once I got close to graduation, I was actually pursuing master's programs in health studies. But I had decided, and I was in a course to take the MCAT and the whole nine. So I'm one of those people where, like, it's a true shift,
Mm-hmm.
So I got so just enamored and captivated that I was like, okay, I want to go into Black studies. So I shifted. The last program, I remember the last program that was accepting applications in that cycle was Ohio State University. And I ended up getting in and, did my master's African American studies and then came back to Michigan State to do my PhD. But I was one of the people that fully got, a nice 360 shift in that as well. And what keeps me committed is my passion and love for the field. What I love about Black Studies is that it is interdisciplinary. Right? So we're borrowing from all of these other fields, and it allows for like an endless possibility in that. It allows for this well-rounded perspective where you can stretch and you can like think outside the box and, to really help you understand Black history, Black culture, right? And in doing that, it allows you to really have this kind of intimate portrait of Black life. I think of it as like holistic, as fully encompassing. That allows you to look at the nuances, the gaps. And so we're not kind of like, while we have our own theory and methodology, of course, right? There is some room to borrow from other fields and what have you. So we're taking our major theories and our methods and bridging that as well. And I think it just makes itself for really thorough, critical analysis in really looking at investigating our history. I'm trained in history. And so for me, I'm able to bring a wealth of methods and theory. And when I think about the work of Black Studies, so much of my work really speaks to Manning Marable, right? His article, Black Studies in a Racial Mountain, and, how he talks about, our work as descriptive, right? We're describing our realities and our everyday experiences, how it's corrective. We're correcting these racist ideas and this misinformation, broadening, the understanding and the fullness of Black life. And then it's prescriptive in that it offers a solution, and there is a critical connection to the community. We're just not writing to be writing, right? A bridge in theory and practice. Everything we do is towards liberation for our people. And that's a core component that makes Black studies so unique. And that's when, for me, when taking up, when I, went on the process of writing this biography on Erica, that's what I wanted to do. The book is unapologetically a Black studies project. It is essentially this kind of toolkit for activists, for students, for laypersons to really understand wellness practices and how that connects with political activism. It can really inform how we think about our own lives as we are trying to survive in this world. With all kinds of violence happening and anti-Blackness happening and what have you. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, two things, right, on the book with what you said. So, one, you talked about how like Black studies can borrow from other disciplines and fields to create and paint a more holistic picture, right? And so I want to hear a little bit, if you don't mind, about your process with this book, because writing a biography on somebody that's alive and writing a biography on someone who has not had that done before and on someone who represents a group of people who have not had that done before is something very different. So do you want to speak a little bit about your process and how Black studies really enabled you to write this book?
Yes. So, with Erica Huggins, there are so many people. I teach a course on the Black Panther Party. And on the first day, I'm asking my students, what women, members in the Black Panther Party do you know? And when many never even heard of Erica Huggins, they never even, not familiar with her at all. And so in particular, when I think about the work of Erica Huggins, because her work, or I should say because her history or because her archives are not all placed in one location, there are parts of her life that are in various archives all over. And then there's these major gaps in the archive. I had to really stretch the boundaries, right? When we think about methodology, when we think about oral history, and really doing a work of Black women's biography. And so for me, one of those ways in really recounting her story and really getting an intimate portrait of her life, or I should say an intimate understanding, was through sustained conversation over time. Because she has not she doesn't have her own autobiography. There is not no location where all of her records are kept, right? I had to really, talk to her over time. I didn't get the luxury of being able to have this kind of gap or distance, which just didn't work for a project like this, right? And so there was a lot of trust and negotiation that was cultivated between the two of us. And so I am talking with her, doing these kind of sustained conversations, in addition to looking at what are the archives out there, what are they telling us. I'm also interviewing other people that knew her, had relationships with her. I am locating people that she was incarcerated with, from, other women that she mobilized with, as well as people that was representative of the state, like the correctional officers or what have you, to really, get this deep understanding of what her life looked like. The heart of the work looks at Erica's survival strategies, wellness strategies behind bars. That's the part of her life that we actually we know very little about it. We don't know what happened behind those bars. We don't know what happened when she was incarcerated. And so it allows us to see what Black Panther Party activism looked like during incarceration. Like there's an extension of what was happening, on the ground, in the organization, locally, or what have you. When we think about the community survival programs, Erica and the other Panther women that she was incarcerated with are extending that work and doing that, and mobilizing with other women that are incarcerated while she was in prison. So I was very interested in that, required me to really go deep, work with the prison Erica was incarcerated at, to get her prison records. And I just found all kinds of stuff, as far as logs that they kept on her movement. Some of her medical records were in there. And again, working with Erica, because she had to sign off for me to get a lot of that material. But the lens that I was able to bring to the project, because of my Black Studies training and my Black feminist training, allows me to really think about what does gender look like, and race and class in this particular context in the 1960s and 70s amongst women political prisoners. Erica's relationship as she was coming up in Washington, D.C. So I was able to bring this list and really thinking about liberation in this kind of communal sense because of my Black Studies training as well. So it was beneficial. And I of course, and I will also say that my race, my gender, and my class mattered in ways that I would have never imagined in my conversations with Erica. Like and I talk about this in the book, our first conversation, she's asking me questions about my race, about my gender, where am I from? The fact that I'm from Detroit, Michigan, or the fact that I'm a Black woman, these things matter, right? And it had meaning within our conversations and language and things that was said or things that wasn't said, and we got each other. And so all of that cultural context that is wrapped around race, class, and gender matter.
Absolutely. I can't imagine that a project like this could exist without that, right? Because you do have to have sustained conversations, because this is a living person. And this is a living person who has not put out their own autobiography, right? So you are they're trusting you with their story to put out there into the world. And so who you are matters. And what they think your motivations and intentions are matters. And I can't imagine the amount of pressure that probably is too. Like, you have to represent her in the way that she approves of.
Yeah, there was a lot of negotiation, going on. There was some moments of conflict in my lens as a professional historian, looking at her life through this, through what the archive is telling us, and through my scholarly lens and how she interpreted her life.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big challenge. I think there were also moments in when I'm negotiation and Erica being comfortable with letting the world see her unguarded.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And with that, there are times when, there might have been stories in a book she wanted me to cut, because she was uncomfortable. So there was a delicate balance. And there was times we had to have conversation about some things as well. And so it was a project. It was an expansive, challenging project. It took me 10 years to write it. But it really does allow us to see the Panthers in a very unique way. Oftentimes when people think about the Black Panther Party, they're not thinking about spirituality, not thinking about wellness. And the book allows us to think more expansively about the organizing work, and that there were pockets of organizing in the Black Panther Party around wellness and spirituality, and how that ties deeply with political activism.
Mm-hmm. So you lay out in the book, and this ties into like thinking about methods, because you talk about the methods that you used in the book, but you also lay out the concept of spiritual wellness and what that means. And I think that particularly right now, like the concept, the idea, the practice, marrying the theory to the practice is something particularly important to take note of. So do you want to say a little bit about how, one, the concept of spiritual wellness, or I guess the first question would be like, how did you come to see that as the lens through which, or the focus that the book was going to take? Because I would imagine that there were a lot of different perspectives or vantage points that you could have written about Erica Huggins from, and to take the idea of spiritual wellness and make that the through line. How did that come about?
Well, Erica's life is centered around spirituality and wellness. It really speaks to the coreness of who she is, that came upon, or I should say, that really took shape during her incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
So it was when she was incarcerated that she had to go deeper. She had to go inside herself, right? And really lean on practices so that she can come out of prison with her soul intact.
Mm-hmm.
right? She can come out of prison well and not broken. And her lawyer, one of her lawyers at the time, Charles Gary, was a big yogi. He used to do um, all kinds of yoga postures before he would go to trial. And so she went to him and she said, "Hey, I need a book on yoga." And so he gave her a book on yoga, and she studied that book while she was incarcerated and self-taught herself how to do yoga and meditation. And she had to be very intentional when she engaged in those practices because she's incarcerated and not on her own time. So sometimes she could only spare 30 minutes to practice a pose or to engage in a kind of silent meditation. And even when I look at Erica's earlier life, like in our conversation, she's talking about spirituality, even when she was trying to figure it out. I talk about in the opening book, I tell a story when she was a young girl and she's looking in a mirror and she is saying, I can see something in my eyes. There's something deeper there. And so the book is really this journey. We kind of see her go on this kind of self-discovery that doesn't end at the end of the book. It's something that we are still on that continuous journey, at least for, when I talk about Erica and when we think of spirituality. But it's something that became a centerpiece of her life. And for me, what was one of the most critical times is that she filled a gap in the Panthers, right? And so even when she got her freedom, she brought all those spiritual practices back to the Black Panther Party. And Erica would say, that we didn't have this kind of place to deal with our grief. When there were other comrades that got killed by the police, they would, you attend the funerals and you just kind of keep going. We didn't have a spiritual container. And that became very clear for her when she got out of prison. And so she really filled a gap. I mean, from there, Bobby Seale started the Son of Man Temple, right? This kind of spiritual temple that party members would participate in and engage and what have you. And so, it was needed when we think about wellness. And so, that's how it became a centerpiece because, it's essential to who she is. If you're writing a biography of Erica Huggins, you cannot write a biography without talking about spirituality. Even in my conversation with Angela Davis, she was saying, look, I look to Erica because, Erica at the time when no one understood what was going on, she was making connections between political activism and spirituality. And she taught me things when I was incarcerated. So it became clearer and clearer the role of spirituality and her significance in the organization, particularly in that capacity. And most people know about her work in the context of the Oakland Community School, or some may know about her work as a poet, but very few know about the connections between spirituality and wellness as a whole when we think about the Panthers and Erica's relationship to that.
So that kind of leads into being able to make those connections, understanding that that is the centerpiece, that is the thread line that holds everything together. That kind of goes back to the different methods and ways that you're making these connections, right? So you mentioned your training as a historian, you're training in Black studies, you're training in Black feminist studies. How do you situate yourself in relationship to the different fields or disciplines? And how do you think those intersections allowed this book to come about?
Yeah, so I'm trained as an African American Studies scholar, but then I'm also trained as a historian. So I'm bridging both of those fields together. And so I'm looking at my work through the lens of history. However, I'm also integrating theory when I think about Black feminism. I've leaned on literature in the work as well, which is so important when you're thinking about gaps and, um, what literature offers us to help
Mhm.
this deeper insight into what's going on. And so it's informed by history. Our history comes from activism, protests. It's by asking these questions, thinking critically, looking at the archives, letting the archives guide our work. Um, and then taking up and my focus taking up issues, or I should say the focus on Black feminism and resistance and protest and freedom making. And then my classes are designed around my research, and so there is a intersecting relationship. So kind of through all of that, it really takes shape in the work, and I'm also thinking about in the work I follow her political journey in college. Kind of her political unfolding, being a part of political organizations, that Black studies kind of, I should say, influence, right? I
Mhm.
mean, she was there when Stokely Carmichael was writing Black Power at Lincoln University. So I'm also tracking those prints of social movement, political activism in the work as well, which has everything to do with Erica becoming a member of the Black Panther Party as well. I mean, it's so much a political biography.
Yeah, for sure. And it definitely, I think that one of the things that was striking to me is was all of the different intersections, right? Like you said, the holistic picture. And I think that as much as archives may or may not be able to reveal, particularly about Black women,
Mhm.
uh, the not only the ability to speak with her directly, but the work that you put in to speak with others that knew her, to
Yeah,
make sure that there were other perspectives
yeah.
and recountings. That oral history piece is so important, and I don't know that it would have been possible without those additions.
Yeah, I'm an oral history scholar. I truly value oral history. There is something about oral history that you just can't always get in the archives. Of course, we know that, right? And one thing about me and Erica's oral history is that there are times when she was silent, and I had been talking to her so much, I kinda knew what that meant. It was times where we have moments of laughter, we have moments where we're crying. I mean, it's a fullness, it's
Mhm.
a lot of, all the moments that the utterances or what have you, it's all of these moments that come from oral history that really adds to the rendering of the past in really, really important ways. And so you're right. I could not have done this book without talking to Erica. It just is just not possible. Um, and so, I'm grateful that she's still with us. And she gave me so much of her time over the years and really entrusting me with her life history. And she also connected me with other scholars doing work on the Panthers, other people who knew her. Sometimes I would have archives or it's these letters I have that haven't these unpublished letters, and I will go to her and trying to kind of put some of the pieces and it was me
Mhm.
things that only she knew, that. And so it became, or some things I would find and she's like, oh my goodness. So it became really, really critical to talk to her. I've talked to, some of the lawyers that work with her, what have you. And so, oral history is it's really important. And when you're doing social movement history, and you're writing about, so even if we look at, because it's not just about, it's through the life of Erica, but it's so many other women's voices that comes out of Erica's life story. I mean, one of my favorite characters, or one of my favorite people in the book, should I say, is at the time she was a young teenager named Millie Rivera, and she organized in prison with Erica. She organized what was called the Sister Love Collective. And she has a very interesting story. So I trace her life in the story. And she runs away from prison and she gets caught and she comes back pregnant. And Erica is writing, to a journalist and advocating for her family to come visit her and to get her maternity clothes. And they're not treating her right in this prison. And so, and that's one of many women's lives that come out that oftentimes, are not the super famous people we hear about, but just everyday people living and breathing and doing this amazing political work. And so, oral history, and even with her, I talked to, she's since passed away, but I talked to her brother, who told me when she ran away, she came to visit me. I was like, what are you doing here? I talked to her daughter, and she's telling me about, how, she balanced motherhood while she was incarcerated. So it really gets into this larger story of these women's lives and the organizing work that they were doing.
I think that is one of the things that stood out to me the most was like, I mean, obviously, like people are full people, right? There are multiple things going on in everybody's life at once. But oftentimes when we talk about organizing of the past, or we frame things in a particular way, it misses out on all of those other pieces. Like life is happening in the midst of this, right? Like when you're talking about the work that Erica Huggins did with the Oakland School, right? And like, or even like writing the Black Panther newsletter, and it's like, well, her child was babysat so that she could, like, 3 days we got to get this done, and like the reality of what that meant, and the trust and community that has to be developed in order for this type of collective organizing to be possible, I think is really, it's a really important lesson, right? Like you have to have support systems in place to be able to do the kind of deep work that she and so many others did at that time. It's not an individual effort.
No, it's very much a collective effort. What you see in the work, the interdependency that is so embedded in the Black Panther Party. But also, Erica is a master at cultivating networks and communities through her training, you can call it, as a member, I should say, through her membership in the Black Panther Party, building communities, establishing networks, mobilizing. So she's taking all of that knowledge and all of that skill set that she has as a Panther and applying it while she's in prison and doing this work. They're reading political theorists or what have you. They're studying the same thinkers that the Panthers are studying. They're learning these skills. There's one woman I write about who was a hairdresser in the Sister Love Collective. She was in prison briefly, about a month. And she said, I felt like I was there much longer than that because I came out so politicized. you're so much more politicized coming out than when I came in working with Erica. It's so no, it becomes important. And, when we think, it makes me think about motherhood. And, Erica says, look, I didn't always get it right. I think some of what she experienced is no different from what other civil rights leaders, and we've heard other civil rights leaders talk about, and that their children may feel neglected, or they may feel like their parents are much more involved with the larger movement and not present in their daily life. That definitely is the case in some respects for Erica as well. With her last child, she was able to be much more present than she was with her other children, because he was born when the Panthers were no longer around. And so she was able to be fully with him, be a stay-at-home mother for some time and what have you. And so, that's one of the areas that Erica admits that she struggled with in really balancing motherhood. But you see these stories, but that family connection, that larger connection, is solid in the organization.
Yeah, that thank you for elaborating on that, because that was something that really stood out to me. And I thought was so important to think about, like, right now, given our current context, and what may or may, like, the strategies and the networks and the community support that people are going to need moving forward, like what that looks like and what is required for everyone to be able to have what they need. Studying those stories and seeing where that has happened in the past is like, it's happened. So we need to see what's been done so that we can see how that gets replicated in the 2020s.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we see that with the Panthers, with them meeting a need. They literally went to the community, found out what the community needed, developed parallel programs. Erica certainly did the exact same thing while she was incarcerated, really meeting the needs of all of those women that she was incarcerated with. And so, we definitely need that today, particularly when we think about our political climate.
Yeah. So how do you touched on this a little bit, but I want to go back to it. So how does your research and how does your work as a scholar in Black studies and Black women's studies and trained Black feminist studies, how does that inform your classrooms, like your pedagogy?
Well, there is a relationship. So, my research, so much of my research work, particularly when I was working on this project, is about the Panthers. So, of course, developing a class on the Panthers, right? And women in the Panthers, and looking at gender in the organization, to me is important, because I think of that as an extension of my research work as well. Like, I'm learning from my students as much as they're learning from me. I'm reading all of the current work on the Panthers and doing a deep dive. And there is an exchange happening, an interrelationship happening. So if I can, I always try to develop courses on what I'm studying, because, it becomes an extension, it becomes critical. At least that's how I see it, as a trained historian. And a lot of my courses, we do a lot of historical work. We're looking at archives, we're looking at oral histories, we're looking at gaps, we're looking at actual primary documents as well and what they tell us. And I find that students love that kind of interactive part, where they get to be put in the seat of a researcher and actually look at original documents, or have an opportunity to actually talk to one of the people that we're covering in the class, and then looking at the archival work. That's the fun part for me as a historian, you know. Um, and when I write, it's not just about dry facts and dates and this happened. I'm trying to tell a story. I'm a story,
Mhm.
and so I bring that in my teaching as well. I think that's where part of the learning happens as well. Is not just, this happened on this day or what have you.
Yeah.
It's the it's the storytelling with it, and what can you take from it that applies to your life. For me, you have to have this application because students need to see how this applies to me. How can I take this and apply it to the work I want to do as a social scientist, or the work I want to do in medicine or engineering or what have you? So that component is critical to Black studies. That is so important to Black studies. And it helps us really see the work of Black studies in action. And so that's how I make the connections between my training in Black studies, my work as a historian, and my teaching.
Thank you. I think that probably not often enough students get to work with primary sources, right? And I think you're right in that there's something different about that.
Mm-hmm.
And students being able to touch the documents and make those connections and feel like they're finding things that maybe haven't been talked about in the same ways before provides an element of excitement that can really allow the information to take hold in a way that just lecturing probably wouldn't.
Right. I like the hands-on component. I'm that
Mhm.
interactive hands-on. We're gonna go outside. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna do some really creative. And I think we for me, it's important to think like that because our environment is changing so rapidly. Technology is changing so fast. We're up against a lot of competition
Yeah.
to keep our students' attention. And so, I want to think outside the box. When I think of my connections as a historian and my work in Black studies and my work in Black feminism or what have you, I'm thinking outside the box. And I want my students to do that as well, right? Be cutting edge, be transgressive, be really thinking ahead as you are also recovering the past.
Well said. I think that be thinking ahead as you're like, yeah, you got to do both. So I have two more questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It is a Friday. We want our weekend. So first, what interests you most about the past of Black studies, both in critical and excited senses?
Oh, man, I would say the evolution of the field, the institutionalization of the field has always been so fascinating
Mhm.
to me. When I teach, anything on the field, I spend a lot of time on how the field was institutionalized because there's so much activism in that. Right? Student activism across the country. That's really, really exciting. That's still exciting for me as well. Students, making demands and having students analyze what those demands are. What does that mean for us today? Right? What would you add? How would you further build on that? Right? Looking at the department and what have you. So that's really interesting. That's part of what interests me and excites me about it. And then I think about how far we've come. For example, when I think about um, Black women's history, Black women's biographies, there's so many more Black women's biographies out there and are being written as we speak.
Mhm.
And so that's exciting. Um, I'm thinking about scholars doing work in the field of slavery. It's so much really rich, wonderful work out there as well. Um, There's also a lot of work that is being looked at in areas like love or, this kind of intimacy or, all of these other topics that when I was in grad school didn't read the same. It wasn't always as legible in the same kind of way. And
Mhm.
now, when we think about it, how we talk about it and applying it and looking at it as a lens, right, to talk about the past, it's really useful and really generative. So that is really exciting as well. So, yeah.
Okay. So then what interests and excites you about the president and future of the field? And one of the things that, if you want to think about it this way, so one of the things that has come up a lot in these conversations on the podcast have been that like Black studies is about the questions that you're asking. So the questions being rooted in Black life and Black culture and Black survival, and the methods that you use to answer that question can borrow from all over the place, right? But it's about the questions that you're asking. So are there particular questions that you think are important as we move forward in the field?
I'm always interested in questions around mundaneness.
Okay.
In the everyday, in those moments where there might be revolution happening or not, but there is life and activity, and it still has really, really deep meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in stories of those who often don't have the microphone, right? And what their stories tell us as well about Black life.
Mm-hmm.
And so those type of questions, as well as and my work deals a lot with wellness, and my future project deals with wellness. So I'm also thinking about healing and wellness. I'm thinking about restorative justice. I'm thinking about how we work through conflict, how we talk through difference, right? Those are the kinds of questions that I am often exploring in my work. So yeah, I would definitely agree that it's all about the questions that you ask. But I'm usually always thinking about resistance and freedom, essentially freedom. What does that look like for you? What is freedom to you? You know what I'm saying? And how do we get to that? Those are two central questions that you will see always in my work and whatever I publish.
Okay. Well, I think those questions are quintessentially Black studies questions. Like,
Yes.
how do we get free?
How do we get free? Right.
In varying degrees, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, there's freedom, that there are moments of freedom that can be had in the everyday, in the mundane, and then there's liberatory freedom for all that has yet to be achieved. So what does that look like? I think that's important.
Right. And we're all trying to live and thrive, and what does it look like when we're trying to do that and be well at the same time, Yeah. And when I think about freedom, I think about choice, For me, when I'm thinking about freedom, I'm thinking about having the power to make my own choices and having my own autonomy, right? And not being told, what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to do, how, what I'm supposed to do with my body, and all of these kind of things. Really having that choice. And like Nina Simone reminds us, being fearless, well, as tied to freedom. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I got to talk to you and talk a little bit about the book. Is there anything you would like to add?
Just that the book is out there, is wherever, books are sold, and I just hope you support the work. It's really important. I'm really, really proud of it. And I just think it's really important scholarship.
I agree. It's a great book. I think that it is definitely a story and a perspective that needs to be told. And I think it's very timely. Like, have it out right now in January of 2025. I think it's very important.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you have a great weekend and a wonderful semester.
You too. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.